agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Michael Baranowski, a professor of political science at Northern Kentucky University. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, Cleveland area attorney Jay Carson.
Hey, good morning, Mike.
Hey, Jay, how you doing? Yeah, Happy New Year to you too.
So, no, I gotta tell you, I'm doing well, and usually I say something silly or funny, but I think in all seriousness, with the dawning of a new year, I feel grateful for so many things that went right in the last year, despite everything that went wrong. And I hope that you and most of our listeners feel the same, right? That we can take away some gratitude that it's over and we made it, and we're moving forward into a better world, hopefully. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I certainly feel that way, especially given what I think will be happening on. I'm pretty sure will be happening on January 20th, but more on that later. But before we do get to that, we want to thank our newest supporters: Susanna, Scott, Catherine, David, Victor, William, and also Wayne, who increased his pledge of support. That means an awful lot to us. We really do appreciate it. And of course, as a Patreon supporter, you don't only just get that second full-length episode every week, you also get ad-free versions of all of our shows, as well as other things at different levels of support. And to check it all out, just go to patreon.com/politicsguys. And of course, if you would like to hear our weekly bonus show, but you're in a position where you can't afford to support the show financially right now, totally not a problem. Just send me an email, mike@politicsguys.com, and I will get you all set up. And if a monthly pledge is too much of a commitment, or you just have a thing about Patreon, which some people do, we also have a PayPal option. You can check that out again, politicsguys.com/support. And one thing that helps us out enormously, and that is absolutely free, is you're spreading the word by sharing episodes on social media. It only takes a few seconds, and it is unquestionably the best sort of advertising. All right. With that, Jay, I wanted to start us off by talking about something unprecedented, at least in the Trump administration so far, a veto override. Yes.
The Senate on Friday overwhelmingly overrode. Is that
overrode? Yeah.
Overridden. But
he was ridden over. Yes,
essentially exactly. Negated President Trump's veto of the National Defense Authorization Act by a vote of 81 to 13, which is that's a pretty big number. This was, I think, expected. I expected it, and I think I even predicted it. Although I think in fairness, what I predicted was that he wouldn't bother to veto it in the first place, because it would get overridden. But here we are, and that follows on the heels of a House vote, which was even more overwhelming, 322 to 87. So that is sort of it's Trump's first time he's been had a veto overridden. It will likely be the last time, given just the timing of where we are. So I think that's significant in a couple respects. One, it sort of shows that for a lot of folks who believe Trump could sort of declare himself emperor, and that you could have congressional Republicans follow in lockstep, that this just didn't seem to pan out, particularly on issues of defense authorization, which is, I think, everyone, there's wide bipartisan, I'm doing it too, bipartisan agreement that the bill in and of itself is necessary. The holdup, of course, was Trump wanted parts relating to Section 230 of the Telecommunications Decency Act, which would have opened up would have gotten rid of some liability protections for big tech social media giants. But and I guess that's sort of we sort of put this in just as a kind of a footnote because it just happened. But yeah, what's your impression on this as far as
Well,
state of play.
One thing I note is that in his 4 years in office, Donald Trump has vetoed 9 pieces of legislation, and both George W. Bush and Barack Obama had 12 vetoes in twice the time that Trump was in office. Bush was overridden 4 times, and Obama just once. And it occurs to me that's sort of an indication, given the fact that Donald Trump has never had a Congress that was entirely of the opposite party, just kind of goes to show how incompetent at legislating I think Donald Trump is. The fact that he's issued more of these vetoes. Now, I know another spin on it might be that, well, he's not a creature of the swamp or something like that. I don't think those things are necessarily mutually exclusive. You can be an outsider and incompetent, as I think Donald Trump certainly is. But a couple other things I noticed is the people who actually voted against the override. There were actually some Democrats who, Bernie Sanders was one, and Elizabeth Warren, Ed Markey. So, but of the Republicans, there was, of course, Lindsey Graham didn't vote, and yet another one of his profiles in courage that he's famous for. Perdue and Loeffler didn't vote as well, or they weren't present to vote, which kind of, I guess, makes sense because they don't want to get the wrath of the president. But yeah, I agree with you. Just generally speaking, that the larger message here is that Donald Trump really has never had that much legislative influence. He has more electoral influence than legislative influence, I think. And so
that's a good distinction to make.
Yeah, I think so.
And the two are not unconnected. But there is a distinction.
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, not surprising to me either. As he rails, like a Mad King Lear type, sort of at the end of his presidency about sad and weak Republican leadership, that sort of thing. It's almost sort of a fitting way for the biggest loser to go out. Actually, I think. So
blow winds blow and crack your cheeks.
There you go. There you go. Barry, see the high culture guy right there.
Yes. Well, it surprised me a little bit when you just brought up the numbers. I sort of would have expected going in, if you'd asked me this question 4 years ago, that the Trump veto numbers in and of themselves would have been a lot higher, right? That Trump as the autocrat would have been all about vetoing any piece of legislation that, look, he thought a comma is out of place here, I'm going to veto it. But yet didn't. So I think that's curious to me. Now again, I think there's a good point that look, throughout most of this, all of this, you had Mitch McConnell kind of playing defense, so that the president didn't have to do that. But I just would have temperamentally, you would have expected more vetoes from Trump.
Yeah, and I agree with the point about McConnell, certainly. And I guess to my point, what I'm suggesting is that if you have at least one chamber of Congress that is controlled by your party, the idea that the fact that legislation would get to your desk that you would need to veto suggests some sort of failure in the legislating process, that you're not really doing necessarily your job. And I think that certainly seems to be the case with Donald Trump. As looking back, while I'm sure there are a lot of Republicans who would say there are some things that they really liked about the Trump presidency, again, were I still a conservative, I think I would see it in many instances as a missed opportunity.
You're here, yes. So and yet, and here sort of segues to our next story. We have a stimulus package that passed before the holidays, and again, I'll take credit because I said we'd have one.
You did,
but not without some last minute drama from the president. And again, this is sort of last minute drama that is a little bit inexplicable, and very much as far as I think a lot of Republicans are concerned, self-destructive. The package that passed was approved by both houses. Was approximately $900 billion, which is just shy of $1 trillion. And included, most notably, $600 checks to all adults, and then to dependents, you could claim $600. Well, dependents under 17, $600. with a sliding reduction once you reach certain income limits, $75,000 filing singly, $150,000 filing jointly on your taxes. So and at that point there was some real consternation, and we were off last week and didn't deal with this. Regarding this, where the president, whose team had essentially helped with the Senate, right, in negotiating this compromise, which is what we just talked about. This is as you would expect if you have one branch of the legislature that your party controls. You typically don't have to veto things because you sort of have some say and some input in what gets through that House. Yet in this case, Trump sort of negotiated the deal and in Trumpian form then sort of backed out and said, no, I think a better deal, and demanded $2,000 payments per adults. Now, his proposal still would have had the $600 per kid. That, of course, opened the door for Nancy Pelosi and the House Democrats to go and pass a bill which would have $2,000 for all the adults.
The Cash Act. Love the name.
Yes. and hers actually, and I just read this the other day because it was one of those things. I think things were moving so quickly, and nobody had read the bill, and you had to realize what was in it. The Democratic proposal also includes $2,000 per dependent, which that's big money. So. At that point now, that brings us to where we are with the latest standoff, where this bill has been moved to the Senate. Mitch McConnell has attached it to some other provisions in other bills, hoping that it would make it sort of a poison pill, right? That Democrats would have to vote for other things in order to get this, and that Republicans will sit tight throughout. But I wanted to get your thoughts first of all, and then we'll talk about, I think, stimulus. Bigger picture. Is this, does this work as a stimulus? Does it not work as a stimulus? But on how we got from sort of the president, well, maybe I'm going to veto this, maybe I won't, last minute to where we are now.
Well, I mean, from all accounts, Lindsey Graham went golfing with the president and gently talked him down, and I guess that's that's a big part. But who knows what goes on in Donald Trump's mind? It's just one of those Rube Goldberg sort of devices, and we got to that point because I think we've gotten to this point because Donald Trump is, like I said, incompetent legislatively. I think that's been demonstrated time and time again, and so that's seems to me that's Occam's razor. That's the simple explanation is Donald Trump doesn't know what in the hell he's doing legislatively, and there you go.
I mean, I think that's it. I mean, I guess it's almost too simplistic to think that way, but because to me, this is. I mean, his own Treasury Secretary was the person who negotiated this thing. So exactly, yeah, and that's the thing that for anyone who has been involved in politics, worked in politics, and sort of knows how the game's played. This is a bizarre sort of like your linebacker turning around and sacking your own quarterback.
Yeah,
I mean, it's just it's bizarre, and I'm not sure what would be gained by it, and it's not particularly an ideological point, right? I mean, I think I could almost see it being the other way, right? If you had a profligate Senate, right, who's saying, hey, we're going to just keep passing money out, and the president saying, no, I'm drawing a line at X. I'm not going to I'll veto anything that costs more than $900 billion or whatever the number would be. I mean, I think that could make sense, that there would be sort of an ideological piece to it. Trump's argument was, look, there's also a lot of other junk in the bill, which there was, which there is, and I think that's a fair point to make. But again, that's you don't deal with that at the veto stage. You deal with that at the negotiation stage. So I think it's just, again, a strange sort of, again, does no one here know how to play this game sort of piece of it. And it also, just as anybody would realize, it it puts the Republicans at a tremendous political disadvantage, right? Because it's the argument of, well, we'll give you $1,400 more.
Yeah, sure.
It's really
people like free money or free money in quotes.
If you're a Republican, something or should know is that, look, you're never going to outbid the other side. No matter how much money you were to authorize, the other side will always say, yeah, but this is only $900 billion. We wanted $3 trillion. You terrible, heartless bastards. So again, Trump. This is sort of Trump's, sort of a middle finger, not just to the swamp, which is what a lot of people elected him to do, but sort of to Republicans in general and Republicans who stuck their neck out for him throughout these last 4 years. But going to the merits of the stimulus, I kind of wanted to get your thoughts. Between $2,000 per person and $600, I very much have some thoughts on this about how it actually works, and to some extent, almost I've got sort of mixed thoughts, mixed feelings on it. But wanted to see where you came down as a principled liberal, but on what the stimulus ought to be. Is 600 enough? Is 2,000 too much?
The correct number would have been 0, Jay.
Wow.
Because you need to think about what we're doing with this money. And the whole idea, well, there are two grounds where the correct number is 0. Number one, if you're just looking at it from a heartless bastard, just looking about stimulating the economy, don't worry about poor people or anything like that, just economic growth. Well, there are plenty of economists, most economists, both on the left and the right, will tell you that what you're looking for is the greatest what's called multiplier effect. And the way to do that is not to give money to people who don't need it and who are going to largely put it into savings, which is, in fact, what a number of studies say happened for people who were doing okay with the first stimulus.
Yeah, my numbers, and just to put a point on that, because Mike, actually, I read up ahead more than I usually do, and the studies that I've seen said 80% either saved the first stimulus or used it to pay down debt.
Exactly. So that has a very low multiplier effect. And so what you want to do is get the money to people who are going to spend it right away. And the people who are going to be most likely to spend all of that money are people who are unemployed and need to, do things like buy groceries and right. keep their kids in clothes and that sort of thing. So I say the correct number is 0, not because I am a heartless bastard, but because, number one, it'd have a greater stimulative effect on the economy. And number two, it would actually help out the people who most need the help. And so, my wife and I, we got money from the first stimulus, and we're actually doing, pretty okay. We took a little bit of a pay cut, but we're not in dire straits. And I heard stories about people saying, well, I donated my stimulus money. And I thought, well, wouldn't it have been better off if we just had gotten that money to those people in the first place? So I totally disagree with 2,000. I disagree with 600. 0 would have been right. And taking all that extra amount of money and putting it either into increased unemployment, either the dollar amount or an increased extension would have been the right way to go with that. So I'm disappointed all the way around with that part of it.
Wow, you're sounding like the Mike Baranowski I grew up with, the guy I used to know. Until you got to the other. So, but I think those are some great points, because I'll say the same thing. Especially with the under the Democratic proposal right now, that if that would pass, me and my family, I'd get $10,000. And much as I'd like,
$10,000, that's nice, sure.
$10,000. Do I need it? No, I don't. I'm not saying, again, I'm a, Scrooge McDuck here or
some other skinflint.
But no, I it's certainly I'm not hurting, and there's others who are, and there's a really good article, and I always point to the Wall Street Journal because I think they do great stuff, but on the economics of this, that so often in a recession, the problem is a collapse in demand. meaning people are not buying things as much because they're concerned about the future, so they're holding on to cash, or they've lost their job and are either relying on savings at this point, so they're cutting back, or they just really don't have money to spend. But again, some interesting numbers from the first stimulus and showing from where we are pre-pandemic to now. The current checking account balances for most Americans is about 50% higher than it was pre-COVID.
Yeah.
Now, again, maybe that some extent that reflects a cutting back. But in this recession, it's not a collapse in demand; it's larger a collapse in supply, right? And the industries that have been hit hardest, restaurants, tourism, that sort of thing. Say, I get my 10 grand from the government. Were I to say, woohoo, 10 grand, I think I'm going to go on a cruise. Well, I can't do that. So if the idea is to get money to the industries that have been hurt most, it fails. So I'm surprised and heartened by by your response. And this also brought back, and this is just a bigger theoretical thing. It was Greg Ip in the Wall Street Journal who calculated, look, if you wanted to target the lowest percent quartile sort of folks who were really hurting in this and get them back to where they were pre-pandemic, the people who have dropped into poverty because of the pandemic, his estimates, you could do that for about 1.5 billion, which is again, a little about 2% of the stimulus that we just passed.
Yeah, sure.
And there was also, sort of some fascinating things that in my fringe of my memory from way back in the 90s, where you had conservatives who had argued that, maybe one of the better ways to address poverty is not through continuing payments of various, redistributionist sort of welfare, earning income, tax break, that sort of thing. But rather, if there were a way to get lump sums to people who are really hurting, that might make a bigger difference. For example, allowing them to pay down debt, to get some sort of savings, to have that chunk of change to go to school and get educated or trained to do something different. And I just found that fascinating because, again, I was going to look up to try to see who had proposed these sort of things. But it was like folks, heritage type people who are making these proposals kind of back in the early to mid 90s. And I just kind of wondered, I mean, your thoughts on that is, setting aside the stimulus itself, is a lump sum approach to poverty maybe something that we ought to look at in the future?
I mean, I'm for.
I'm hitting you from like you didn't see that coming, but
No, I mean, I generally think that giving people who are in need, getting them off their feet and giving them money and letting them decide what to do with it is generally a pretty good idea, as opposed to just sort of, cordoning it off and saying you can spend it on this, that, or the other, or that kind of thing. And also, I think it's going to be more effective because you cut out some of the administrative costs and middle people and that sort of thing. So as a general idea, I don't have a problem with it. I don't have a problem with it at all. What I have a problem with is, giving money to people who don't need it. I have a problem with wasteful spending, as I think everyone should have. And I understand that to defend Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats, I think where a lot of folks on the left are coming at this from is they're thinking this might be our last sort of bite at this particular apple. And so is it better to have to get this money to people, even though a lot of it's going to go to people who don't need it, but at least some people are going to get some? Well, yeah. And also politically, this works out well for us too, because people like free money. So I think that's how they're approaching that.
And I would say this is, maybe a little bit of an irony here, but the people who don't need it tend to vote more frequently.
Well, yeah, I would
Would
say
you
so.
agree?
Yeah.
I think that's it. I mean, I think so often, so many programs that people are sold as, oh, we're doing this to help the people who are really struggling are really pretty solid middle class subsidies. Because those are the people who vote most frequently and pay attention to these things. So that said, where do you think we go depending on what happens in Georgia? Do you think Senate Republicans agree to any sort of a $2,000?
No, we're not going to see any more payments. No, I'm not like that. Nope, I don't think we're going to see any more direct payments after this $600 thing. That's it. Okay.
Assuming a double Democratic win in Georgia, do you think the Democrats bring back this?
Nope, I don't think so. I think more unemployment, expanding the unemployment, both perhaps the amount and the time period, because I believe in the current legislation, it's just 11 weeks is what it is. And I think there's going to be a great need for after that. So I think probably the focus is going to be on getting it to be more than 300, probably pushing for that 600, which was the initial in the initial CARES Act, and then also just extending the time a little bit. I actually expect that no matter what happens, we're going to see one more extension of the time period, because 11 weeks from now, we're still going to have some pretty significant unemployment issues.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with you on the unemployment extension, because I think that's an easy vote for everybody, right?
Yeah.
On the hey, we're going to give you money. I mean, I've actually seen things coming from the other side of the aisle that basically says, hey, you elect Democrats in Georgia, you get $2,000. I mean, and that's the selling point. It comes down to that crass of look, we will get rid of Mitch McConnell and $2,000 for each of you. So I don't know. I think if the Democrats were to prevail, and we'll talk about this later. I'm betting they won't. But I think there will be a lot of pressure to either revive this proposal or even come back with if 2,000 is good, why isn't 3,000 better?
Well, I disagree, and also I guess I'll disagree with the logic to a certain extent, because then by that same logic, if 3,000 is great, wouldn't 50,000 be better?
Oh yeah, no, I'm not subscribing to the logic by any means.
Oh, well, no, I'm saying that that's just not something that's going to be proposed. I mean,
the politics of it.
No, I guess I disagree in the sense that I know that there are a few people on, say, the far left and some other people out there who think that, yes, we should just give everyone whatever, $10,000, $20,000, $50,000, but that simply does not represent the mainstream of the Democratic Party. And I think that's where I take issue with you. I don't see Democrats saying 2. No, I say 3, say 4. How about 5? Because that's just not going to happen.
Okay. All right. Well, I respect that. And like you often say to me, I hope you're right. So moving on to our next story, this is, again, sort of a good news, bad news type story of after the vaccines. We're now at 2 vaccines approved, one more likely to be approved shortly. The president's goal had been that 20 million people would be vaccinated before the end of the year. And the numbers fell woefully short of that. Although the vaccines have been delivered, there's been a lag in the rollout in the states. Now, the way this was set up was the federal government left the actual rolling out of the vaccination, meaning who actually gets their shots first and where they do it and how they do it, to states to administer. In some cases, some states have pushed that even lower down to local health departments. If here we're going to send it to the locals to administer, and the result is you've got this big patchwork where some states have done better than others. The last number that I saw, Mike, was the federal guess is that about 2.8 million people have been vaccinated. Now that there's sort of an asterisk by that number in that there may be a lag in reporting just because of the holidays and people not being at work and so forth. So it could be higher than that. Likely is higher than that.
Well, let's call it
still well short of the goal.
Let's call it 3 million. But going back to Donald Trump's promise, he actually late in 2020 promised that there'd be 100 million vaccine doses manufactured by the end of 2020, and we ended up with, I think, somewhere around 40 million doses manufactured. But that's not surprising because Donald Trump was all about overpromising. In fact, he said 100 million doses and likely a whole lot more than that, actually. And not surprising that that number was wildly overinflated.
Right. But I mean, I guess to the other point that even if that number had been correct, the problem is less the number of doses and more just the actual administration.
And see, that's the thing that really just annoys not annoys, but just depresses me in a way, because earlier this year, Health and Human Services provided states with $350 million for distribution-related expenses, but the states said that they needed around $8 billion. Now, they got that in the COVID legislation that was approved last week, but I feel like it's almost criminal that this wasn't approved earlier in the standalone bill because, the money is great, certainly, and is important, but even if you just dumped $100 billion out of a freaking plane, you still need the time to build the infrastructure, to get the people to distribute the vaccines, and everyone knew that. And the fact that both Democrats and Republicans did not act on that is just disgusting to me.
Well, although I guess, you and I might differ as far as should the vaccine rollout have been I guess so. What you would have envisioned?
Here's what I would have envisioned:
more federal aid for the states, but the states still actually doing the administration and figuring out who gets what when.
Well, I don't know about that. I mean, maybe not, but certainly, I think one thing almost everyone can agree on is everyone knew that state, local health departments were incredibly taxed just with responding to COVID. And they knew that they were going to have huge issues with scaling up to do the greatest logistical feat since World War II, certainly. And you can argue even greater in some instances with no extra funding. And everyone knew that this was going to be necessary, regardless of the amount of discretion freedom states would have to design their own programs. And so the fact that the President of the United States wasn't getting on his soapbox and demanding a standalone bill for state money for vaccine distributions by late summer, I think is just insane, basically. And that I find that just disgusting. Like I said,
in fairness, let me ask this though: if the president had been saying demanding money for state vaccine distribution in the summer, the press would very much have ridiculed him, laughed at him, like they did when he announced early on that, listen, we're going to have a vaccine by the end of the year, and various fact-checking organizations said that's false. And there's a wonderful sort of video loop of all the talking heads from all the networks, back Trump making statements back in the mid-spring time period saying, listen, we're going to have a vaccine by the end of the year, and all of these people, most of them with medical degrees and better coiffed than Trump, sort of just shaking their heads and chuckling of no, that's absolutely impossible, and it's a miracle, and this is just false. So I mean, Trump certainly overpromises on a whole lot of things, but
I think that misses the point, Jay.
His ability to seek more money before there was a vaccine, I don't think that would have gone anywhere.
I think you're entirely wrong, because just as you said before in the last segment, Democrats love spending money, love giving money to states and so forth. So the idea that everyone knew that there was going to be a vaccine, and whether it happened in November, December, or March, everyone knew that was coming. And so the idea that the media would say, well, certainly we don't want to give money money to states for vaccine distribution. No, I disagree with that entirely.
No, I say, yeah, Trump. The
And again,
Democrats love spending money, but they love beating up Donald Trump.
But the larger
more.
point, Jay, is that Donald Trump didn't do it. And so you can talk about, well, it would have been wrong.
Enough.
It would have been wrong for the media to have responded in the way that you think they theoretically would have responded. But let's get out of theoretical world and into the real world where Donald Trump simply did not make this a priority. And he is the person who, at least the president of the United States, is the person who has the greatest ability to move forward the legislative process if he knows what he's doing. And Donald Trump chose not to make that a priority.
All right, I'll accept the argument that fair enough that there should be more federal funding to states to help with the rollout. But does the difference in different states, because some states are doing better than others, as best I can tell, Ohio has been doing fairly well, and I think a lot of that has to do less with necessarily our government and more with some of the big private sector institutions we have, for example, the Cleveland Clinic, university hospitals, and the big hospital systems, who have can do things with sort of military efficiency, and maybe less, So the first wave obviously was vaccinating healthcare workers. So when you have big hospital healthcare systems in place, they have a good mechanism to get their people vaccinated quickly, and that becomes more and more difficult as you expand out to people who are less centralized, right? You can't just say, hey, stop into HR to get your shot today. But there's another issue, and that is folks who are not wanting to get the vaccination. The number I read recently, again, this is Wall Street Journal reporting, is that 72% of certified nursing assistants say they don't want to get the vaccine. And I think that's a different problem, but if it's 72% of people who are frontline workers, so what amount of money and how does one deal with that?
I would expect that if we're talking about private employers, certainly an employer can say that you will get this shot as a condition of employment.
Well, I suppose they can say that, and I think they I'd say, look, they'd be within their rights to say that, right? I don't think there's.
I'm just thinking from in terms of legal liability, thinking that let's say that you have a parent in a long-term care facility, and you find out that the people who are caring for your parent or for other person, most of them have decided not to get their shots, and then that person gets COVID and dies. That sounds like a pretty significant lawsuit just waiting to happen there. So I would think just for liability reasons that these private organizations would want to make sure that happens.
Sure. But they'd also have the liability issue on the other side, right? Of somebody gets vaccinated, they didn't want to get vaccinated. My employer made me, and they have some adverse reaction, or they have some reaction, or they have something else entirely different that they just got by happenstance that they then blame on the vaccine. So I think it's a double-edged sword for those employers, and that's why I'm not crazy about the blunt instrument of just saying you will get this done. But I'm wondering, why is that number as high as it is? Can some of this be blamed at the Democrats who early on said they wouldn't take a Trump vaccine, right? Now they've certainly backed off from that, but Kamala Harris was pretty vocal about that, as were other prominent Democrats back in the summer, that look, they wouldn't take a vaccine that had been rushed through, and this was being rushed through, et cetera. And now here we are with 72% of nursing assistants, right? People who work in the healthcare industry, who are declining to get vaccinated.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's that high across the board. Governor DeWine said in Ohio, I believe that 60%, around 60% of people working in nursing homes wouldn't want to take it. But the numbers are going to vary. But yeah, I
Right.
agree that.
And Ohio's better anyway. But,
Well,
yeah.
I would certainly agree that the concerns that the process was being politicized, and that, I think there's blame on both ends there, because Donald Trump or his chief of staff saying to the head of HHS, "Hey, either get this or FDA, either get this approved or you're fired," sort of thing. That certainly doesn't help out at all. So I think there's plenty of blame to go around about this, and it's not surprising.
Yeah, but again, those statements were made. That was pretty late in the game after all the numbers were in, and it was just down to a matter of days of, look, can you approve this on Thursday?
I agree, but that's a
next Monday?
distinction. But that's a distinction that's going to be lost on a lot of people, because a lot of people aren't following this to the extent. I'm saying just the general environment is that all of this is politicized. And of course, there are plenty of people who still think that COVID is basically like the flu, except a tiny bit worse. There are millions, tens of millions of people like that. There are also a lot of folks who think that, well, since I've gotten COVID, I may not need the vaccine, and we're not really sure about that so much. So, I think there are a lot of reasons, but I agree with you that the general environment of everything being politicized about COVID, hurts the uptake. The uptake numbers for this, but without seeing any sort of survey data on why people are doing this, I'm certainly not going to say, well, it's Nancy Pelosi's fault.
Right. Now this is, I haven't seen any data on this either, and in part because, look, all of this has happened in the last 2 weeks, right? And it's been over holidays, and it's not as if big studies and scientifically valid kind of surveys have been able to be conducted yet. But reading anecdotally, what you get is people are saying they're not taking it because, well, they're concerned, they're afraid.
Yeah.
So I think there's some of that out there, and that's unfortunate. Anyway, I mean, I guess we'll leave that there. I guess what would you have any recommendations, though? I mean,
well,
how do we get more people vaccinated more quickly? One being, okay, we've approved more money now to the states to do this. How do we?
I think this was inevitable because of the scope of this, and we've never done anything like this before. That, of course, the uptake was going to be initially a lot slower than all of the very rosy, I think some of the rosy projections about that. So this really doesn't surprise me. I think that it would have been helpful had there been, if not a federal mandate, much clearer federal guidance, perhaps linked to or suggestions. And, if you want to go the mandate route, linking money to sort of a method of getting it out. Because a lot of times, again, people hear various different messages. And so, the Ohio or Kentucky or, California health department might say something, but people are hearing stuff all over the place. And that's why oftentimes getting one message from somebody that you trust can be very helpful. The problem is there's, number one, not one message because of the federal nature of this. And number two, there's not anyone that everyone really trusts on this, except for not even, I was going to say, Dr. Fauci is sort of a saint, a secular saint to a lot of folks on the left at this point, but there's nobody that we trust. And I think that's the biggest problem is that trust has just disintegrated over the last 12 months, over the last 4 years, really.
Yeah. No, I think that's right. I think that's a good point. And I guess that's, where I come back to that. Those are bigger issues that you can't necessarily just fix with money.
Yeah, I know, and I got to say,
I'm not saying that the money that there isn't an investment that needs to take place. Again, to some extent, this is the vaccination effort's going to be outsourced to the private sector. Drugstore companies are going to be handling this, and I feel good about that. Right, I think there's going to be more efficiency there, and than having just a purely government response.
I got to
But
say,
we'll-
my concern on the worst case scenario here is that now we have this new, far more infectious variant, and so far there are only a few, cases, and I think Colorado and Florida and California. But the fact that there are a few that we've detected suggests that there are probably going to be a lot more. And you can kind of trace out a very negative scenario where this really starts to take hold, and there are still a lot of people who won't get the virus, and all of a sudden, we look and we have 500,000 people dead from this thing in the next, overall in the next few months. And that's just, I hope that's entirely wrong, but it's the kind of thing that wouldn't surprise me, sadly.
Right. You've been reading The Atlantic, right? But they had a big piece on this.
No, I didn't catch that.
No, well, check it out. It's sort of the general idea of the new variant is the apocalypse. The real apocalypse is on the way. But
let's hope not, right?
I'm more optimistic, and I really think as this vaccine becomes more available, and again, this is completely anecdotal. This is the Pauline Kael kind of reasoning, but everyone I've spoken to, is ready to roll up their arm and get the shot. So, I think there's a whole lot of people who will get vaccinated. And will do so as soon as it's available. So I'm more optimistic on that, and I think also once we get through doing anything during the last 2 weeks of December is tough.
Sure.
And doing it in a pandemic is even tougher.
Absolutely.
So. My sense is we'll know more in the next week or two, and in a couple weeks you'll have a President Biden who will be able to straighten it all out anyway. So moving.
Speaking of,
yes. Moving, well, maybe you will. There was a lawsuit filed. This is sort of the last. People keep saying this, the last gasp for Trump, but it's sort of like, in the horror movie, you know what I mean? That you think the killer's dead. It just keeps popping up. A lawsuit by Representative Gohmert to essentially, for lack of a better word, require Mike Pence, who will be the presiding officer at the certification of the Electoral College vote, to not certify it. This is almost, I don't want to say almost, I will say is certain to fail in the courts.
And in fact, I should point out that we're recording this Saturday, that actually yesterday a Trump-appointed judge, actually dismissed the case because for all the faults in Gohmert's case, he actually he sued the wrong person.
So on the program, so we don't have
I mean, and even Mike Pence's response, he said, "How are you suing me for this? It makes no sense." It was ridiculous for so many reasons, because as any reading of the 12th Amendment clearly indicates, that the vice president's role in this is ministerial. He opens up the envelopes and he says what they say, and this argument that somehow you can read into the Constitution the vice president's right to or authority to pick whatever or deny whatever electors he wants that's about the most unconservative thing. That just, if you are any kind of a conservative,
I think you and I could not agree more on this issue.
You got to say that
if you had told the founding fathers, or someone had said to the founding fathers, well, so what you mean here is the vice president gets to pick the president.
Yeah.
I think they would have, shaken their no, you idiot. The vice presidency is sort of the
and the thing that Jay,
the least powerful, position in the federal government.
And the thing, Jay, is that Louis Gohmert knows this. I mean, he's an attorney. He's been a state judge. He knows this, and this is what I think makes him a despicable person. At least in this action, I won't say he might be nice to dogs and his family and that, but don't you find this disgusting as a conservative?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And the as a conservative, the trouble, the more pressing problem is the the precedent that it sets,
Yeah.
right? And I think something else we're going to talk about in relation to this is Senator Josh Hawley's statements about how he is going to object to the certification. And Hawley's rationale on this is that, well, one, Democrats did it before, which they did in 2006 and in 2016. And he sees this as a vehicle to raise concerns about election improprieties, about voting security, and so forth. So that's troubling because, we're getting to this, will this now be the regular feature of every presidential election? You'll have the election, you'll have the electoral college vote, you'll have the legal challenges, and then you'll have the congressional objections saying this is all fake. And again, the upshot is it does damage to the system.
Yeah, and
I think a much better way to handle this. And look, I've been on record for quite a while about I think there's a lot wrong in our election security systems, in particularly vote by mail, that there are a lot of big gaps there. I think it's perfectly legitimate to challenge some of the things that happened in this last election, where local election officials, in some cases, seem to just simply defy a Supreme Court order. All that said, I don't think this is the place or the way to do it. The better way is to, you create some sort of subcommittee on election security, and you bring in all these people and you have them testify, and you look at the numbers, and but challenging the process in and of itself, particularly before you have all the information, I think is irresponsible.
Well, and that's because I agree with, like a lot of people, I read Ben Sass's very long Facebook post about this. And as he pointed out, this isn't about the election. This is about fundraising and positioning, because exactly. Josh Hawley looks in the mirror and sees the next president of the United States, right? And he's trying to make that positioning. And so to me, the larger question here is the Republican Party going forward going to be the party of the Ben Sasses in the party, or of the Josh Hawleys? And I sure as hell hope it's the Ben Sasses, but I worry that it's the Hawleys. And I think we're gonna find out a lot about where the Republican Party is when we see those votes, because there is going to be a vote, as much as Mitch McConnell didn't want that to happen. And in that vote that happened in 2005, when Stephanie Tubbs Jones from the House challenged and Barbara Boxer joined her, the Senate voted that objection down 74-1. Now, I'm pretty sure there's going to be more than one vote against that. And of course, let's be clear on what a no vote, or what a vote to uphold the objection means. It's essentially a vote to throw out those electors, to disenfranchise, literally disenfranchise, millions and millions of people. And in 2005, one senator voted to do that. And so if Josh Hawley is serious about, well, this is just my way of raising this issue, then presumably he wouldn't necessarily want to disenfranchise millions of people.
Well, presumably.
But I don't think it's going to be the case.
I would think, though, that the Josh Hawleys of the world, though, see this as a free vote, in that they know there's never going to be a majority, that this won't actually happen, to throw these votes out. So they have the luxury of being able to sort of throw bombs and say, I'm going to do this, knowing that it won't have any consequences.
Well, will it, though? That's the question, right?
It's troubling for a couple of respects. One is, yes, you're right, it won't have any consequences this time. But, these things, you pointed out in 2005, 2006, it was two members, one member. Now I think the numbers will multiply, and I think it could be an issue in future elections, and it sets a bad precedent.
Yeah, and to be clear, Mitch McConnell, who I've gone on record pretty clearly, he is, how I feel, everyone knows how I feel about Mitch McConnell, but he does know how to play this game, and he wanted there to not be a Senate objection to join the House for very good reason, because he felt that it could hurt the GOP's chances of expanding or of getting more seats in the midterm elections. And so I tend to defer to Mitch McConnell's judgment on what is best for GOP Senate numbers, because that's his life, right? That seems to be the only thing he maybe cares about, but he certainly cares about that. And so this to me is an example of Josh Hawley putting his own political ambitions above those of, the Republican. Sure, Ben Sass is positioning himself as well. He's been doing that for years as kind of the, sensible, moderate sort of guy, kind of like a Mitt Romney for the new generation, I guess, if you will. And I'm okay with that, because I think I would much rather have the Republican Party be directed by the Mitt Romneys and Ben Sasses than by the Josh Hawleys and Mo Brookses and Tommy Tubervilles. And I assume you would too.
I think, I'll tell you the sense that I get, and again, this is not survey, this is not data, this is this is anecdotal, but that's what you pay me for. Is that Republicans I talk to, the biggest frustration I always hear is why can't we be tougher? Why can't we have a backbone like the Democrats do? Why can't we play hardball? And I think it bodes ill because that's what Trump was selling, and that's what Hawley is selling even more so. And Hawley, I think there are a whole lot of reasons to find him objectionable for the broader Republican cause. There's a number of incidents. I'm not going to go through them all, where some judicial nominees, he's sort of pushed, sometimes making the perfect the enemy of the good, and sort of flummoxed, the administration's efforts. And this is true also on other legislative pieces, right? He has jumped in on the we ought to give more money, the $2,000 to everybody, and the reasoning he gives there as well. There's a lot of bailouts and pork for big companies or for states or for other people who don't need it. So we might as well magnify the problem, I guess, by throwing out more money. And that's sort of the I think that's troubling is he doesn't have the fiscal conservatism anchor, and it seems just to be all I guess all hardball but without a purpose, if you follow.
Well, there's a purpose, and the purpose is to advance the career and power of Josh Hawley. Yeah. Right, but no broader ideological. I'm doing this for the bigger cause. Yeah, whatever works. Exactly.
Of economic liberty and freedom and all the kind of things that why I signed on to the party.
Yeah, so. Which is why I can even though I think he's wrong on so many things, I can and sometimes very wrong in almost a repugnant way, there's a certain amount of respect I can have for someone like a Rand Paul, who I recognize as being driven, at least in some part, by actual principles, as opposed to Josh Hawley, who just seems to, this is the bandwagon, I guess you should be jumping on, and I just find that just repulsive.
Yeah.
So, Jay, I know that there were a bunch of things we were hoping to get to today, and while we won't, certainly we can get to them on the bonus show, like, for instance, the Georgia election. This will be our last chance, to talk about it before the election actually happens. And so we'll certainly be talking about that on our bonus show. And then there's also, we wanted to talk a little bit maybe about modernizing Congress, because as a lot of people might not know, the first thing that the new Congress does is it actually passes the rules that will govern it for the next couple of years. And there's an interesting sort of bipartisan list of recommendations that came out about that, as well as a study that I found fascinating about what's sometimes called trickle-down economics, and maybe if we have time, some predictions for 2021. Now, that Georgia runoff election is actually going to be on the 5th, right? I am right. The 5th,
Yeah.
Tuesday the 5th. So this week we're actually going to release our bonus show early. In fact, by the time you hear this, it should be released so that way people have a chance to listen to our discussion of the Georgia runoff elections, except, before they actually happen. That might make a certain amount of sense. So if you aren't a supporter and if you are a supporter, that will be in your feed by the time you hear this. If you're not, again, just go to patreon.com/politicsguys and sign up. And again, if you can't afford to, just let me know, Mike@politicsguys.com, and I will get you all set up. And if you just generally got a question, comment, correction, gripe, manifesto, whatever for us, our email is mail@politicsguys.com. There's also our Facebook page, facebook.com/politicsguys page, and we are also on Twitter @PoliticsGuys. The executive producers of the Politics Guys are Bruce Johnson, Wilma Moreno, Andrea Masker, Daniel Toe, Chris Wilkerson, and Nathan Sosnowski. We'll be back with a new show next week. We hope you'll join us.